I graduated from Stanford University with a degree in medieval history and philosophy, which meant that I was completely unemployable. And I graduated in the middle of a rather dire recession. We had long gas lines. Anyway, like many liberal arts majors at that time, I went off to law school. My dad was a law professor. He really wanted me to follow in his footsteps, so I trekked off to law school. And I discovered pretty quickly that I hate law school. And although I was what I would describe as a fairly dutiful daughter, you know, I was the daughter who always did what my parents wanted me to do, I made a very brave decision, the bravest decision of my young life at that point, and went home one weekend and told my mother and dad I quit. I sort of figured out at 23 that if I didn't love what I was doing, that I probably wasn't going to be very good at it. So now my resume reads, medieval history and philosophy major, law school dropout. I am less employable. And so I decide that I got to earn a living. So I decided to go back to work doing what I had done to put myself through Stanford. I was a very good typist. In fact, my first job when I was in college was to type in the shipping department of Hewlett-Packard. This was a very long time ago when we used typewriters, when a bill of lading, it was called then, in a shipping department was 8 copies with what was called at the time mimeograph paper in between. I feel like a dinosaur speaking to many of you as I say that. So I went into the want ads and I accepted the first job I was offered, which was to type and file and answer the phones for a little 9-person company. Ironically, that 9-person company started by 2 entrepreneurs named George Barkas and Bill Millichap. Their building was 1 block from the headquarters of Hewlett-Packard, to which I would return many years later as a chief executive officer. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do with my life. I had no inclination that I was going to go into business. Nothing in my young adulthood had been about business. My father was a professor, my mother was an artist. And after about 6 months, 2 men in that 9-person office came to my desk and said, you know, we've been watching you and we think maybe you could do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do for a living? Do you want us to tell you something about our business? And that was my first introduction to business. And I found through that I liked business. I liked the numbers of it. I liked the teamwork of it. I liked the results of it. It wasn't theoretical, it was practical. And as they say, the rest is history, sort of. Before I went off and got a business degree, I ran away to Italy to teach English for a year. My parents were now truly concerned. But eventually, I ended up in business school and went to work initially for what was then the Bell System, now called AT&T, 1 million employees. And I started working in Washington, D.C. as an entry-level salesperson in a 1 million-person corporation. Now, why do I tell you that story? I tell you that story, first of all, in case you're worried that you don't know what you want to do with your life. It can work out okay. Also to say that that was a great job, although it was a very humble job. I learned a lot in that job, typing and filing and answering the phones, which is to say there's something to be learned from any job and every job. There's dignity in learning in all work. And one of the things that I learned in that job was that anybody can make a difference in terms of how business runs. I learned that one day when a man came into the office and said, I've decided I'm going to bring my business here. I'd like to speak with a broker. It was a commercial brokerage company. And I said, well, that's wonderful, sir. How did you decide that? And he said, I decided it based on how you answered the phone every time. You seemed like you really cared about this business, that you really cared about me, and that said a lot to me about the business. That was a very valuable lesson, and one I didn't forget when I became a CEO. But I tell you that story also for another reason. You see, I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world. I've seen people in all kinds of situations. I've been in business, I've been in philanthropy, I've been in politics, I've advised government. And here's what I know, still today, in 2013, this is the only country on the face of the earth where a young woman who's a law school dropout and a secretary can become the chief executive officer of the largest technology company in the world. It's only possible here. And it's not because this is the only place where people have ambition. It's not because this is the only place where people have dreams. It's because this is the only place in the world still where it matters less who you are, where you come from, what you look like, what your last name is, and matters more where you want to go. Of course, not everyone has an equal opportunity in this country. And so we have been trying for hundreds of years to create a more perfect union, but it is still true that this is the only country on the face of the earth that was founded on a radical idea. And the radical idea is that everybody has potential, and that everybody should have the right to fulfill their potential. That's what our founders meant when they said everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That political idea, that everybody has potential, has caused people from all over the world, all kinds of people from all kinds of places, to come here for hundreds of years to try and fulfill their potential, to try and fulfill their dreams, to seek their ambition. And that political ideal was made real by an economic idea. And that economic idea is how I got my start. It's called entrepreneurialism. My story, that I started in a little business, that two entrepreneurs started and gave me my chance, that story is the American story. Small businesses create more than 2/3 of the new jobs in this country and have for decades. Small and new businesses employ half the people in this country and have for decades. Small businesses innovate at a rate 7 times as fast as big businesses. I was really proud when I left Hewlett-Packard that we were generating 11 patents a day. And yet small and new businesses innovate at 7 times the rate of big businesses. In other words, the ability to imagine something different, the ability to create your own future, the ability to say, you know what, I think I'm going to take a chance. I think I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to go build a business like George and Bill did. That is a uniquely American opportunity. It's not that people around the world don't have a profound desire, a profound longing to build a better life for themselves and their families. They do. That's a human emotion. And potential is a human capability. But it's only in this country still where we actually let people go do that, where we celebrate that, where we say whether you open the taqueria on the corner or the deli down the street or the dry cleaner or you start a technology company in your garage, we say to people in this country and always have, take a chance, build something, imagine something, figure out how to fulfill your potential. I know through the creation of my own foundation, the One Woman Initiative, where we provide entrepreneurial opportunities to women in absolutely destitute and desperate parts of the world, I know that the desire to build a better life for yourself and your family is profoundly human. It is not uniquely American, but it is uniquely of this country, that more people from more places could create more possibilities for themselves and their families. And that's why my story is only possible here. So I worry when you look at the data. The data says that more small businesses are failing and fewer are starting now than at any time in the last 40 years. More small businesses are failing and fewer are starting now than at any time in the last 40 years. In a recent poll by the Washington Post, 70% of small business owners said they considered government hostile to them. Not neutral, hostile. And if you ask entrepreneurs, people who are trying to make a living, people who are trying to build a better life. It's not that working for a big company is bad. I worked for a big company for years and years. It's just that it's little companies, it's innovators, it's entrepreneurs, it's the risk takers who have actually built this nation. And every big company that we celebrate today started out as a very small company. So when you ask those innovators, those entrepreneurs, those small business owners, why do you feel the government isn't on your side? They'll tell you, it's just too hard. It's too complicated. I can't make it through a 27,000-page tax code. I don't know what regulations are going to turn up to bite me tomorrow. And they say, you know what? The price of risk is too high. The reward for success is too low. It's less and less worth it. I've talked to a lot of small business owners all around this country, and I can tell you that most of them are pretty apolitical. Half of them are Republicans, half of them are Democrats. This isn't about D or R. It's about the reality that the engine that took a political ideal and turned it into an economic reality and created the wealthiest, most innovative, most unique nation in human history, the engine of that growth and that power, entrepreneurialism, is not as easy as it used to be. And in fact, all the data says it is becoming dangerously difficult. Shakespeare famously asked, "What's in a word?" Remember Romeo and Juliet? What's in a word? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, it turns out there's quite a lot of power in a word. And in particular, there's a lot of power and connotation, negative or otherwise, in the word conservative or the word progressive. If you look those words up in the dictionary, the word progressive means, as it sounds, progress, forward momentum. Most people think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. If you look up the word conservative in the dictionary, what you'll read is things like avoiding change, focused on stability. And what do people hear in that? You know, we're stuck in the status quo. We're kind of old fuddy-duddies, or worse, we're going backwards. So let's for a moment set the words aside. Why is it that I am a conservative? I'll tell you why. Because I have profound faith in the ability of people, if given the chance, to imagine and envision a better life for themselves and to make that vision a reality. I'm a conservative because I believe that people, if given the chance, will make better choices for themselves, their families, and their businesses than somebody way far away in a big bureaucracy is going to make for them. I'm a conservative because I know, not from political experience, but from practical business experience, that big centralized bureaucracies are ineffective, inefficient, and prone to corruption, abuse, and fraud. And that's true whether you're a business bureaucracy or a government bureaucracy. And I also know that Decentralized decision-making always works better than centralized decision-making, particularly now. So let's set aside the words for a second. I just want to illustrate that last point by thinking about what is the age we live in. Set aside the words for a minute. Let's talk about the 21st century. Let's talk about where we are right now. Those of you who are students here, you're living this, so maybe it's like a fish swimming in water. You don't know what you're in sometimes, but it wasn't that long ago that the iPhone didn't exist, okay? At the turn of this century, there was no iPhone. And forgive me, you'll recall I was a history and a philosophy major. So you will permit me this. For the first time in human history, any person, anywhere, can get any piece of information on any device at the time and place of their choosing. Of course, they have to have access to technology. You can't do it in the middle of a poor, destitute village in Africa, but the capability exists. Any person, anywhere, can get any piece of information on any device at a time and place of their choosing. That is transformational in human history. Why? You know the old saying, information is power? Think about how bureaucracies and big institutions work. Think about how they work. Information flows up in a hierarchy, decisions flow down. Think about how that decision-making apparatus is rendered less and less capable in this technological age. Information moves too fast. Events move too quickly. Why is it that people see all the time government bureaucracies? It's not a political statement I'm making. It's a pragmatic observation. Why is it that people observe government bureaucracies struggling and straining to keep up with reality, to keep up with demand, to keep up with information? Because, frankly speaking, bureaucracies are not capable of functioning effectively in this era. It is why you see businesses that survive and thrive aggressively decentralized decision-making, because they know that centralized decision-making, big bureaucratic structures are not working. What's the definition of a bureaucracy? Somebody once defined a bureaucracy as an organization that spends at least 50% of its time communicating with itself. Pretty good definition. I've managed lots of bureaucracies, and I've worked hard to break them down. And if you're spending at least 50% of your time communicating among each other, what are you not doing? You're not keeping up with reality. You're not serving constituents, whether they're customers or citizens. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. And here's another reality. Every time a new rule or procedure is put in place in a bureaucracy, what happens? By the way, bureaucracies run on rules and procedures. And what do those rules and procedures try to do? What's the purpose of them? The purpose of them is to tell people how to behave, how to respond, how to react. That is a bureaucracy by definition. It is an organization bound by rules, procedures, and processes. And so what happens when people are bound by rules and procedures and processes? Well, they don't get to use their judgment. They don't get to innovate. They're not rewarded for being creative. They're not even rewarded for problem solving. They're rewarded for following the rules. And yet here we are in this technological age where things are moving so quickly that the rules that got written, that govern most of these bureaucracies in Washington, D.C., let's just say, or govern our commerce, So many of these rules and procedures were written a long time ago. Imagine for a moment, how many of you are studying business or are in business, for those of you who are? Okay, well, in a business, one of the things that you try and do is make sure that you are serving customers better than your competitors. And one of the things that customers demand from every business is, I want better products and services at less money. Customers are very demanding. You look around at consumer behavior in this country, people will go for higher quality and lower cost every time. So what happens? Businesses are constantly thinking about, how do I be responsive to my customers? That's why decentralized decision making is so important, because it puts people closer to the customer. It gives them the autonomy and the authority to respond to reality as it happens, as opposed to being hidebound by rules and procedures that were written with some other customer in mind. But it also means that businesses are working hard to take cost out of a business so that they can offer that better quality, more responsive service at a lower price over time. Think about the technology we were just talking about. Year after year after year, the functionality goes up and the price goes down. That works in virtually everything you buy in your everyday lives. Except in Washington, D.C., in big centralized government bureaucracies and big centralized programs, what happens? Exactly the opposite. Every budget of virtually every department in Washington, D.C. has increased every year for 50 years. That's also a bipartisan statement. This has happened under Republicans and it's happened under Democrats. There are virtually no departments in Washington that have gotten smaller. There are literally no departments that today have fewer rules. They all have more. So what we're doing is building a system that is more and more complex, more and more expensive, less and less effective, more and more bureaucratic. And meanwhile, the thing that made this country special, the ability to go try something, to use your judgment, to figure out how to solve a problem, that is getting harder and harder. I believe the reason our economy is sort of in a flat line right now, look, for the US, 1.2%, 1.5% growth, this is not what it should be. And I believe the reason for that is because we are crushing the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. You see more small businesses failing and fewer starting. That's a structural problem that we have created, in my opinion, through excessive regulation, unbelievably complicated bureaucracies, an excessively complex tax code, and a government that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And as a result, becoming more and more and more bureaucratic and less effective. And if you have departments that are awash in money, again, I don't care whether it's in a business or in a government. If you have bureaucracies that are awash in money, that lack transparency and accountability, where people really don't know what's going on in them, you're also going to have fraud over time and abuse over time, because there's a lot of money and people can get away with it, and that too is human nature. So, I'm a conservative because I have great faith in people's ability to imagine a better life for themselves and their families. I have great faith in their innovative and problem-solving capacity. I think they make better decisions most of the time, given enough time and enough information, than somebody else is going to make for them. And because I believe the centralized bureaucratic decision-making structure that exists in Washington, D.C. today is now crushing. It's crushing of judgment, it's crushing of innovation, it's crushing of common sense. If you look at how you and your generation use technology today, you are the most independent, self-reliant generation of human beings ever. And so does it make sense that in this era, when anybody can get any piece of information, anytime, anywhere, for any purpose, that more and more and more of our lives should be governed by huge bureaucracies with anachronistic and overly ineffective rules and procedures? I think big government programs and big government bureaucracies are on the wrong side of history now, and on the wrong side of technology. And of course, I believe we have a classic example of this unfolding before our eyes in the Affordable Care Act. I'm a cancer patient. I'm a cancer survivor, so I have seen up close and personal all of the reasons why our healthcare system needed fundamental reform. I've seen the cost, I've seen the complexity, I've seen doctors negotiating with insurance companies or Medicare to try and get the right kind of treatment. I've wondered as I received shots to boost my bone marrow, a single dosage of that shot, which cost $10,000. What would have happened to me had I not had a good insurance plan? Of course our healthcare system needs fundamental reform. And of course Americans, all Americans, deserve access to quality, affordable healthcare. But the Affordable Care Act, the act itself, the piece of legislation, is longer than a Harry Potter novel. Literally. Literally. Accompanying that piece of legislation is 11,000 pages of regulation. You don't have to be a partisan to understand that the weight of that complexity is going to crush a system that is already staggering under too much cost and complexity. I think we need to look at where and when we are in human history and say that never before have human beings had so much power to fulfill their potential. Never before has an individual had the kinds of tools that you have. And so here we are at a time where more people in more places can accomplish more things. Why would we crush that potential? Why would we burden that opportunity with vast, complex bureaucracies and regulatory regimes? It is why I think ultimately we have to radically simplify our regulatory scheme. It's not that regulation isn't important. Of course it's important. But consider this. I mean, you have to have rules of the road that make sense in any marketplace and in any environment. So of course there's a rule for regulation. But consider this. I am unaware, and I've done some research, I am unaware of a single regulation in Washington, D.C. that has ever been sunsetted or repealed. So what have we done? We have created over the last 50 years a literal Grand Canyon of geologic sediment of regulations, complexity. It's why small business owners say it's just too complicated. How did we get a 27,000-page federal tax code? I'll tell you how we got it. Because big business and big labor and big government all got together and tried to figure out every possible situation they could think of. By the way, Washington works pretty well for big business. I was a big business CEO. And big business can afford to hire lawyers and accountants and lobbyists to figure out, you know that loophole on page 24,295, that really helps me out. I want to keep that one. Big government works well for people who are big, interests that are big. Big labor is big because they have big voting power. Big business is big because they have big money. But what it doesn't work so well for, what all that complexity doesn't work very well for, is an individual or a small business or an innovator. This is an age in which we can actually imagine radical simplification, putting more power in the hands of people. I actually think that if the founding fathers were alive today, they would say, wow, this technology gives people the ability to do so many things. Technology is a tool for democratization. It is a tool for providing equal opportunity. If you doubt that, think about what happens in these poor, destitute parts of the world when someone is handed, through the power of technology, an opportunity to find a market or connect with somebody else. It is life transforming. And so why, in this incredible age, would we burden our citizenry with vast, complicated bureaucracies, regulations, tax codes, not to mention how expensive they are? We do it because, in some cases, there's ideology behind it. There are people who truly believe that someone else can make better decisions for you than you can make for yourself. I reject that. I think of course people make mistakes, but isn't that part of life? That's how you learn. It's how you get better. You gotta make a mistake. So, I'm going to stop talking, but I'll go all the way back to the beginning because I really want to take your questions and talk about whatever you'd like to. What's in a word? Conservative, avoiding change, progressive, moving forward. I think those who believe that vast centralized government programs and vast centralized government bureaucracies are the way to govern this nation or to unlock human potential or to accelerate our economic growth, those people are on the wrong side of history. Nothing in practical reality suggests that those kinds of programs work. And everything now says that people are more capable, more empowered, more able to do what they do best, which is to decide how to live their lives within understood rules of the road, of course, decide how to live their lives, decide which dream they want to pursue, take a chance, take a risk, and go build a life. All right, I'm going to stop talking. What would you like to talk about? Yes, sir.
I thought your talk was great. I have a two-part question. Number one, where do the massive entitlements fit into this, discouraging people? And number two, can you name a country in the Western world that is not ensnared in the same thing we are?
Yeah. So hopefully everyone could hear the question. Let me start with your second question. It's true. Virtually literally every Western democracy is ensnared in the same kind of problem. And so it's worth asking, why does that happen? Well, it happens because people are compassionate. It happens because people say, you know, we got to help you out. And I agree with that. But what happens over time, and this is just human nature, it's true in any bureaucracy, what happens over time is once something gets started and you own it, guess what? It doesn't go away. Nothing ever goes away. It just gets built on and built on and built on. Why? Because people, once they own a program and have a budget and have people reporting to them, what do they want to do? They want to hang on to that. There is nothing greater than the power of the status quo. Nothing. Why? Because people who've succeeded in the status quo want to keep what they have. So if I'm, you know, somebody, you know, a government employee, by the way, it's not that government employees are bad people. They're trying to do their job too. But I'll guarantee you, whether it's a business person with a budget or a government person with a budget, once you have a budget and you have responsibilities, you want to hang on to them. You are not liable to step forward and say, let me get rid of this, it's no longer necessary. And so what happens? In a business, the pressure that is put against the power of the status quo comes from where? Competition, customers. There's this constant pressure on business to examine things because guess what? They're competing. Why is it that technology advances in leaps and bounds and the costs continue to go down? It's not just Moore's Law. It's because technology is also a hyper-competitive industry. Well, guess what? In government, there is no competition. There are no choices. If you're a citizen, you got what you got. And oh, by the way, there's no transparency either. We don't know where our money is being spent. Think about it. Do you know how your tax dollars are spent? None of us do. And there's certainly no accountability. Because one thing bureaucracies are very good at is, you know, moving around accountability. Because after all, it actually isn't a person who's accountable, it's a bunch of rules. So the point is, once a program gets started, it stays there. And that's how we get this geologic sediment. And every time we have a story about someone who's in need, we say, oh, we got to help them. Yes, I do think that the vast entitlement programs that we have today are causing people to say, not everyone, but causing some people to say, you know, maybe I don't have to take that job. Now, as a candidate, I supported extending unemployment benefits through the recession because people were losing their jobs through no fault of their own, but at a certain point, it becomes clear. I've seen it with a sister-in-law I have. I've seen it with nieces and nephews where people will make a judgment and say, you know what, I'm not going to take that secretarial job where I have to type and file and answer the phones. I'm going to stay on unemployment. And yet, that secretarial job was a great job. Wasn't the perfect job, but I learned a lot in that job. And it set me on a different path. So, entitlement reform is fundamental. It has to happen. And it has to happen because it's too much money, but it has to happen as well because it's no longer meeting its intended goals. One of the great mysteries to me is why, with Simpson-Bowles sitting there on the table, nothing's happening. It's pretty clear what the answers are here, by the way. I mean, we may not agree on 100%, Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, but 85% of what was in Simpson-Bowles, most people agree with. There's a template there. Vastly simplify the tax code. Reform entitlement. It's pretty clear. And yet nothing's happening. Because politicians are captured by the status quo too. And their status quo is, I want to keep my job.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for that compelling talk. I really enjoyed it very much. I'm Danilo Petranovic. I teach here. For some of you who are interested in William F. Buckley Jr., I'll be teaching a course in the spring on William F. Buckley and his intellectual influences. Thank you for that. I always say that. I'm recruiting for my course. In any event,
okay, you're allowed.
I'm allowed. It's exactly. It's a free country, right? So I have a very specific question about, well, I guess crony capitalism is the word we hear a lot today. How does our central bank, the Federal Reserve, relate to that? Is this an institution that, in your opinion, does more good or harm to our country? Thank you.
Well, I would say first that it is a fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The income gap is widening. And it's important, I think, to understand why that's happening. Among other reasons, it's happening because the wealthier are those that tend to be invested in stock markets, mutual funds, etc. The stock market reaches record after record after record close. Why? Because the central bank has ensured that equities are the only investment where you can earn anything. That's why. That's the simple truth. Economic growth does not support the current stock market levels. Earnings don't support the current stock market levels. I mean, it's not that earnings are terrible and economic growth isn't bad, but it doesn't support records of all time. What supports it? Zero interest rates, easy money. The stock market is the only place where you can earn a return. So, the central bank's policies have in fact made the income gap worse. We're not creating enough jobs, and that hurts the middle class and those who are poor more than those who are wealthy. The stock market continues to go up, and that makes people who are invested in the market wealthier. Second point, I do not agree with a dual mandate for the central bank. So I don't think the central bank has any business printing money in order to bolster employment. A, I don't think it's working. I think that's pretty clear. I mean, again, if you look at the data, set politics aside, just look at the data. The central bank has poured trillions of dollars into the economy for 5, roughly, years, and we still have the worst post-recession recovery in decades, ever, perhaps. And job growth continues to be anemic. It's not working. I think the central bank should have a single mandate, and that is to combat inflation and to manage the money supply, which is what it traditionally had. I think the dual mandate not only isn't working, but it is prone to political influence. And I think the money supply should not be influenced by politics. So yes, I think it's a big problem. And I think if, for those of you who watch the stock market, you know that any time Ben Bernanke or another Fed president says anything that's interpreted as tapering or not, the market zooms up or zooms down. If that isn't a demonstration of too much power in the hands of too few, I don't know what is. And by the way, let me say one other thing. I have great faith in individuals. I do not have great faith that you can put 10 or 12 or 13 or 15 people in a room and they're going to be smarter than everybody else. All of those 10 or 12 or 13 or 15 people can screw it up. I've been in many, many boardrooms. And I can tell you that groups of people are capable of making big mistakes. So it makes me uncomfortable to see so much power, the power to move the largest stock market in the world by hundreds of points in minutes based on 5 words. That is a level of power that I think is dangerous, which is the other reason I would go back to a single mandate.
Hi, so thanks
Hi.
for the talk. So you've talked a lot about the importance of small business and how government regulations are doing a lot to crush their ability to succeed. And I was just wondering how you feel about the role that perhaps intellectual property has played in this, especially with your background coming from a technology company. It would seem to me that if you're able to patent your ideas and secure your ideas, that this sort of stymies progress, and I was just wondering how you feel about that.
So obviously, intellectual property is it's kind of a circular argument, but intellectual property is the foundation of innovation. It's the fruit of innovation. We are the most innovative nation in the world, and people in this country have produced more patents and more innovation than anywhere in the world because we have a system where people believe that if I have an idea, I can protect it and I can profit from it. You know, there is much I could say about the intellectual property system that exists in this country today. I mean, it too has become overly complex and anachronistic. You have patent wars that are waged between companies that are where nothing new is being created or produced, but lots of money is being spent. I think intellectual property protection is the biggest issue we have with China. And having spent a lot of time doing business in China, I think we waste lots of energy and words talking to the Chinese about things where we have no influence on them whatsoever. We will never have any impact on the Chinese view of human rights and their violation. They have a different point of view. We're not going to have an impact. We're not going to have an impact talking to them about manipulating their currency, because they look at us and say, you're manipulating your currency, and you're doing it through the central bank, and by the way, they are correct. But where we can have an impact on them is to be consistently forceful on the protection, the necessity of the protection of intellectual property, and put their economic self-interest on the table so that they take us seriously. Because that is the only thing the Chinese respond to. What is in their economic self-interest? If they believe their economic self-interest is at stake, their behavior can be influenced. That's where we should be spending our time, I believe. I don't know whether I'm getting at the heart of your question, but can the patent system be abused? Yes. Is it? Yes. Is it overly complex and anachronistic in the 21st century? Yes. And yet, it is also true that an inventor's ability to say, I thought of this, I invented it, I get to own the fruits of my labor, has driven huge amounts of innovation. And so it cannot be that it doesn't matter that you invented it. There has to be a way of protecting that.
Hello? All right.
You're
Hi.
on.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the talk. Very informative. I'm Zach. I'm a freshman at Yale right now, college. I just had a question about your campaign, kind of on a different side of things. In particular, last week we had Senator Bay from Indiana come, and he said that in a good campaign, you're really going to have one or maybe two issues that you can really make the electorate care about and really put in your platform that are going to be game changers. And so I just wanted to ask you what those one, maybe two issues were for you, and why you didn't think they were able to end up in a victory.
Yeah. So it's a great question. For me, the issue then, the issue now, is how do we restore the entrepreneurial spirit in this country? And in California, it was particularly important because California's unemployment rate remains above the national average. We've had major cities declare bankruptcy, and if you look at the reasons why, what you see is an exodus of business out of California, small, medium, and large, but in particular what you see is small businesses getting literally crushed. The message resonated with the people we could reach. But let's talk about political realities now. Money matters. Money matters hugely. There are two things that matter in politics beyond ideas and candidates: money and turnout. And so when you're outspent, that means your message reaches fewer people. It is a frustrating but successful tactic to flood the zone, as it were, with campaign ads that caricature an opponent. I was caricatured in political ads. It happens all the time. But if you can do that over and over and over and over with enough money, it drowns out everything else. That's not an excuse, it's just a fact. And you see it happen over and over again. I mean, whatever you thought of Mitt Romney, you know, when ads go up saying that he caused somebody to die of cancer, that's called caricaturing an opponent in a negative way. When conservatives said, oh, Barack Obama wasn't born in the US, that was equally obnoxious and untrue. The second thing that matters hugely in politics is turnout. And Democrats nationally, as well as in California, have perfected the art of turnout. They've used technology incredibly well to turn people out. They've built relationships over years with people to turn them out. It is no secret that in California, a decidedly blue state, that on election day in California, particularly in places in LA County, literally buses drive through the neighborhoods, pick people up, drive them to the voting booth, and tell them how to vote. It's always been that way. So as important as candidates are, and they are important, if you have a candidate who is seriously flawed, you're not going to get very far. As important as ideas are, and they are important. Because while the business of politics is a nasty business, the voters of politics are great folks like you and I, who are trying to make a good decision. But if money and turnout matter hugely. So, whoever wants to win an election has got to raise enough money and get the vote out. And if they can't do that, they're going to lose, no matter how good a candidate they are and no matter how compelling their ideas are.
Much for your talk. I really enjoyed hearing your insights, especially on the idea of bureaucracy. But I have a question. You spoke a lot about how we can try to simplify bureaucratic procedures, but do you have any specific ideas on how we can, in general, decrease our country's emphasis on bureaucracy?
Thank you. It's a great, sorry, did you finish?
Oh yeah, I'm finished.
Yeah. So, let me tell you a story of business first. And first of all, let me just say, I know government isn't business, okay? I know there are big differences, but people are people. And I have a lot of experience with a lot of different kinds of people in a lot of settings, both business and government. When you have a system that's entrenched, and that's what a bureaucracy is, it's an entrenched system where people are heavily invested in the status quo, where people want to hang on to what they have, and where people are driven by the rules and the procedures and the processes. How do you get people to think outside that box? There's only one proven way. It takes two things. It takes a different idea. Guys, we're going over here. Here's where we're going. We're not doing this anymore. We're doing this. And it takes a shock to the system. What's the most effective shock to a bureaucratic system? Cut the budget. That's just practical reality. When I came to Hewlett-Packard, we had 87 different business units. They all had their own president. They all had their own fiefdoms, their own bureaucracies. We were an unbelievably expensive place to do business with. We were losing market share. We weren't leading in any categories. Our margins were terrible. What was the first thing I did? Okay, we're going here. We're going to be a leader again. What was the second thing I did? I said, okay, our IT budgets, we did a study, our IT budgets are 40% above industry average. They were. Our HR budgets are 30% above industry average. We're going to get to industry average. We're going to cut 40% of our IT budget and 40% of our HR budget. How do you suppose people did that? The only way they could do that was to break out of their mindset that we got to have 87 of everything and say, you know what, maybe we don't need 87 IT systems. In fact, maybe it's counterproductive. Maybe we need 5 to focus on the 5 different supply chains we have. Maybe we don't need an HR director for every single one of those 87 presidents. Maybe we could have a core HR function. The point I'm trying to make is this. If you keep feeding the beast money, more money, year after year after year, regardless of performance, and then on top of that, you add, that's what happens in the federal government every year, people get more money, regardless of performance. I don't mean people as individuals, I mean the bureaucracy, the budget. And then on top of it, you add another little wrinkle. You say, okay, if you don't spend your budget by the end of the fiscal year, you don't get that money again. Guess what people do in the government? It's a rational response to that rule. They spend all their money in the last month. I used to sell systems to the federal government, and I can tell you the last month of every fiscal year is a windfall for everybody. The money comes flowing out. because people are afraid if I don't spend my budget, I'm not going to get it back. Now you add all that up and what you have is unbelievable inefficiency. So the reason I'm for cutting government spending is because I believe it is the only way to shock the system. Now, you will hear some people say, I like a balanced budget amendment. I think it doesn't work. We've had many balanced budget amendments and we've managed not to balance the budget despite those amendments. I think what we ought to have is zero-based budgeting. What zero-based budgeting means is you must justify every dollar spent. You have to start over. You can't do it every year, it's not practical, but every 2 years, I would ask every government department to go to Congress and present their budget from the ground up. What does that cause people to do? If people have to justify the money they spend, what must they do? They must prioritize. They must prioritize their spending, which is something that doesn't happen in government either because nobody has to. It will cause people to say, you know what, this is the most important thing I do. I can't let this be cut no matter what. This is my top priority, this is my 30th priority. And then we could make some judgments about what are we really spending money on, and is it worth it? And are we getting the results that we require? By the way, none of this is rocket science. Most of it's pretty common sense. But we have an entrenched system, crony capitalism, a lot of representatives who have their pet thing. Someone needs, I think, someone or someones need to have the vision to say government should be more efficient, more effective, more accountable. And you're not going to get that unless you start cutting budgets and asking questions.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, because he's recording, that's
We
why.
need this. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your talk. It resonates, I think, not only for its principles, but also for its humanity. A question I have, though, that I'm trying to make as practical and to home as possible is, I'm 21. I'm a senior at Yale. I'm a history major. And
Good for you. There is life after history
Thank
major.
you. I'd love to hear that. And I have no idea where I'll be next year. Just none. I'd like to learn something, and I'd like to do some good, but I don't know where that will be. And one thing that I have been profoundly struck by with my peers, good friends, and my own inclinations even, is the very powerful pull I think institutions like this, intelligent kids, the innovators of the future, whatever you want to call us, have to go into consulting, to finance, to inherently multinational, large things that are also inherently, it seems, removed from this productive sector, and that we're meant to consult on something, advise for the finance of something. What is that something? And the complete disconnect there seems to be of what that something is in higher institution is something I didn't really realize until this year. My dad's the head of a small business, and so I kind of have a sense of that, but I never really thought I'd go into small business because, you know, I'm now at Yale. I can go do bigger things. And now I realize I have no idea what those things are. So basically, beyond asking you what should I go do next year, more importantly, my question is, do you have any comment or recommendation on, or interest in, I don't know, on how this has happened? Why is it that the smartest and brightest, supposedly, are being drawn into similarly bureaucratic things? And the draw seems to be that not only are they large, they actually allow you to continue to learn. They continue to teach you. They don't close any doors. You have opportunity because you could say you worked at McKinsey. And that has a lot of pull. But I wonder if you'd suggest for an altered perspective, and if so, what that is.
So allow me a slight diversion for a moment, but this is in the spirit of giving you encouragement as a history major. One of the things that I think is critically important in any field of endeavor, particularly, ironically, given all the technology, is some basic human stuff like judgment, perspective, ethics. You could argue that the entire Wall Street meltdown occurred because people convince themselves, oh, we got to chase the stock market, quarterly results are all important. Oh, by the way, we have a lot of technological models that tell us it's all going to be okay. And people lost sight of basic judgment. You know, basic judgment like what goes up must come down. Real estate prices will fall eventually. Perspective, that we've had bubbles before, we could be in one again. Ethics. A lot of those things, judgment, perspective, ethics, come from learning about different people, different times, different places. Many very successful people in business are successful because they can think and they can write. And a lot of that you learn through liberal arts. If it's history, it's philosophy, it's anything. It's not to say people who aren't taking liberal arts aren't going to be successful, but it is to say that you are learning, whether you realize it or not, far more than the history. You are learning skills that actually are quite important. The most valuable course I ever took at Stanford was a graduate course in medieval philosophy. I took it because the teacher was cool, but we had to, this is the diversion, we had to read a work of philosophy every week. Medieval philosophers were not brief. So, you know, Maimonides, Aquinas, I mean, these were huge books. And we had to read one a week. And at the end of that week, we had to turn into our teacher a 2-page paper on what that book was about. So the process that I would use, I would write 20 pages, I'd get it down to 10, I'd get it down to 5, finally I'd get it down to 2. That thought process, what's really important? What's not important? What's just words? What has meaning? It was probably one of the most important skills I ever learned. And I learned it in a medieval philosophy course. So take heart, you have skills. I was recently at the Clinton Global Initiative, and I was asked to moderate a panel of young entrepreneurs. They were all women, interestingly. And one of them said, you know, we're trained to be employees, not entrepreneurs. In school, we're trained to be employees, not entrepreneurs. There's a lot of truth to that. There's nothing wrong with being an employee. Loads of people are wonderful employees. I was an employee of a big, huge company. But what I think she meant was that people are funneled into choices that seem safer. Well, you're not consulting. You're not closing off any options. You're going to learn skills. You're going to continue. You'll make good money. Let's start with that. Striking out on your own seems chancier, riskier. And after all, you've spent a lot of time in college and you've spent a lot of money, or your parents have. I don't know how many of you saw a headline in the Wall Street Journal several months ago, the United States is becoming a risk-averse nation. They'd done a ton of studies. And people are becoming more and more risk-averse, and that has a cost to us all. Why did I drop out of law school with no prospects for anything? Because I thought, you know what? I got one shot in life. I want to love what I do. I want to be challenged every day. I don't want my days to be drudgery. And so what I would say to you honestly, and I say it to every young person who asks me, take a chance. You're a Yale graduate. You have more opportunities in front of you than 99% of people in your age in the world. You won't fall. You may not make as much money as some peers at first. Take a chance and take the time to find what you love. What's the challenge that gets you up in the morning? What are you going to be excited about? I'm a cancer survivor. I lost our younger daughter when she was 30. None of us know how much time we have. But what we know, what you know, is that you have been given an incredible gift, an incredible opportunity of this education. You can do anything you want. So go figure out what that is. That's what I'd say.
Hi, thanks for coming to speak with us. So I thought you left the story of your life at a very interesting inflection point. You were an entry-level employee in a very large company. My question to you is, how did you manage to stand out at AT&T? and what advice do you have for us college grads going into similar situations?
Yeah.
And I am an antagonist from the previous lady's question.
So it's a very good question, as hers was. When I went to work at AT&T, I'll tell you another story, which is a diversion, but it just, I tell you this story to reassure you that everybody's terrified when they start. Actually, lots of people are terrified when they're, you know, long into their careers. I was hired as an entry-level salesperson, and I was sent off to 9 weeks of sales school, okay, where I was going to learn how to sell. And one of the things I had to do in that 9 weeks of sales school was engage in role play. Role play meant I had a teacher who pretended to be a secretary to a client that I was trying to get to, and my role in this game was to say something so compelling that the secretary would say, well, of course, I'll put you right through so that you can talk to so-and-so and tell them about what you want to sell them. Okay, pretty simple. I'm sitting in one room with a phone, and he's in another room. And I've been in sales school with this professor for weeks now. It's not like I don't know him. I postponed that exercise 11 times. I was terrified. What was I terrified of? I was terrified of failing. I'm a pretty smart person. You know, I got straight A's at Stanford, straight A's at MIT. I was a pretty good student. I was afraid I was going to fail. I was afraid I was going to look foolish. I was afraid I wasn't going to be great at this. And finally he said, you know, you got to do this or you're not going to get through the course. I tell you that to say everybody's afraid of something. And if you are ever in a position to manage people, remember that they're afraid of something too, even though they may not know quite what it is. Sometimes it's something as basic as, I don't want to lose my power in the system. When I got to my job, finally, after 9 weeks in sales school, this will date me, but it's responsive to your question, I was told to share an account with an older gentleman. I say he was older. I am now older than he was at the time. But at the time, he seemed quite old to me. And what I didn't know at the time was that he had some performance issues, and they think, oh, okay, we're going to put this young whippersnapper salesperson, woman, you know, we're going to team her up with him. And they left me. Not an ideal situation. In fact, a bad situation. You know, I'm fresh-faced and eager, and I have all these great ideas, and he's like, yeah, what horse did you ride in on? So about 2 days into this job, we decide that I have to meet the clients. And so we arranged for me to meet them, and the day of the meeting, he comes to my desk and he says, Carly, I'm really sorry, but things have changed. You're not going to be able to meet the clients. I said, well, why? He said, well, you know, the client's always right, and they've requested that we go to a particular place for lunch. We're going to the boardroom. I said, well, what's the boardroom? Well, the boardroom was a strip club. It was a very famous strip club where the young women would dance in negligees on top of the tables. Now, you may not face exactly that situation, but what that was a test. Are you tough enough to do this job? Do you really want to do this job? Are you just some fresh-faced MBA who thinks they're smarter than anybody else? It was a test. I decided to go to the boardroom. It was an incredibly embarrassing situation, but I went. I passed the test. You will be, all of you will be, at every step along your career, you will be tested in a variety of ways. It may not be as crude as let's have a meeting in the strip club, but you'll be tested. And when you are tested, you have to decide if you're going to pass. And when I mean pass, I mean demonstrate to your coworkers that you're willing to put in the hard time. That you're not coming in, whether you walk into a new job feeling terrified, oh my God, all these people know so much more about it. Guess what? They're looking at you and they're saying, here's this new Yale graduate, he's younger than I am, he's technologically savvy, he's got this great degree, I'm gonna lose my job to him. They're afraid of you. So you'll be tested. So, understand that. Collaborate with anyone who will help you. Don't think you know it all. You don't. You don't. In fact, you might be startled to learn that your Yale degree doesn't help you at all initially. Learn everything you can about the business that you're in. Ask for people's help. And importantly, do the hard stuff, not the easy stuff. I made my way up. I mean, I didn't have a plan to become a CEO. I didn't have a plan, you know, oh, I want to be here by this time or there by that time. I mean, I was a law school dropout and a history major. You know, I felt lucky to have this job. But what I did was take the hard jobs, the challenging jobs. Every job I ever took, somebody said, oh, don't take that job. Ooh, that's too risky. You don't have the experience. Don't do that. Don't do that. But here's the thing. When you take the hard jobs, when you do the tough things, people notice. So you're going to get lots of advice to play it safe. But sometimes that's exactly the wrong advice. You won't stand out if you play it safe. You don't take stupid risks. You take calculated risks. You work hard. You focus on a goal bigger than yourself. You team with the people around you. You don't think you know it all because you don't. You do the hard stuff. You take a chance, and you pass the tests that come your way. Just like you do here at Yale.
I have a quick question. I'm going to pass the mic then up here.
And then we'll go to the gentleman up there.
Yes, Bob, 1 second. I want to return to the bureaucracy question, if you don't mind. So I happen to be conservative here at Yale and sympathize by and large with your take on these questions, on these issues. What is the best argument you've heard or you would make for the other side? You know, what do they say? Why do we need the bureaucracy? Why do we need the Affordable Care Act? Why is this such a great policy and such a great thing? Thank you.
Well, see, in fairness to, let's just say, the other side for a moment, I don't think they always think about the practical consequences of the programs that they're espousing. I don't think anybody says, "Ooh, I want a big bureaucracy." But I also think that there is a human instinct, which I admire. There is a human instinct to say, if you need help, I'm going to help you. There is, in some cases, an elitism that says, I actually know better for you than you do. There is an unwillingness when the political heat is on, and this applies to both sides, by the way. When the political heat is on, there's an unwillingness for someone to say, you know what, maybe we need to pause here. Maybe this isn't working out exactly the way I thought it would. Maybe we should stop. I think ideology trumps practicality in many cases. And think about why. You know, one of the things I said when I was running for office was I think we need more non-professional politicians. I think ours was actually intended to be a citizen government. It's only been in the last 50 years that we had a class of professional politicians. Before then, people moved routinely from private life to public service and back again, and that was important because it meant pragmatism and practical experience were at least as important as ideology. You actually knew how things worked. If you have spent all your life in political office as a lawyer, you actually may not know how a bureaucracy works, and you may not actually spend the time to find out. And so programs get sold on the basis of the person we hold up as an example that we're trying to help. And then they get sold with slogans about the best possible case. And nobody ever goes back and checks, well, what was actually the case? The Affordable Care Act started out with a worthy goal, which I support. We need quality, affordable health care that's accessible to everyone who needs it. Amen. We do. And then somewhere along the line, in the tussle for political victory, that goal turned into the insurance companies are bad. By the way, politics always needs a villain, sadly. And we're going to do something about insurance. And then all the vested interests got engaged. And there were a lot of vested interests that helped write that act. Pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, I mean, loads of people got into the act. But who didn't get into the act? The doctor struggling in a rural hospital, or the doctor struggling at Stanford who was treating me, or the patient. And so here we are. I think Republicans lost the moral high ground when they refused to play initially. They refused to put a positive, proactive set of solutions forward when the healthcare debate was coming down the pike. Everyone could see it was an issue that wasn't going away. First came Hillary Care, then came the 2008 discussion in that campaign. Republicans should have stepped forward and provided a solution or proposed solutions. They didn't. They lost the moral high ground. Democrats, I think, got so caught up in winning that they oversold it on hype. They rushed through a piece of legislation, and here we are. Wasn't it Mark Twain who said, if you give me enough time, I can do it in less words? The point is, it's harder to be simple. It's harder to be clear. It's harder to write 2 pages than to write 20 pages. And it's much harder to write a simple and clear act that accomplishes stated purposes than to write a piece of legislation longer than Harry Potter and the Deathly Gallows, with 11,000 pages of regulation attached. I don't think it's what they intend, in other words. But I also think in many cases people aren't practical and pragmatic because they don't know how things actually work. Yes, sir. You are it. You have the mic.
I think we're heading for a chasm, okay, in the next 10 years, all right, and it'll probably be before 10 years are over. You can't keep giving away the kind of money that we've been giving away. What do you do to stop progressives, okay, which started back in the 30s, okay, basically, and with a few exceptions, have gone from the 30s, the 1930s, until now. Okay, nobody wants to cut in programs. I mean, even Ronald Reagan, I think, spent more money than didn't cut in programs.
That's true. I mean, you can't increase the budget of every government department for 50 years unless everybody plays. I mean, this is why a couple things I would say. Let me hold that thought for a moment. One, we cannot check out of the political process. A lot of people look at politics and look at our political office holders and throw up their hands and go, oh, brother. A lot of small business owners who would have influence because they have credibility in Washington say, I'm too busy running my business. A lot of people just say, I don't want to play. But whether you play by running for office or you play by trying to influence opinion, citizens have to play. It's too important. Secondly, I think we need a major shock to the system. And shocks to the system come in 2 forms. They come through leadership, and they come through systematic reforms. And that's what I mentioned earlier. I think there are a couple systematic reforms that are necessary. Zero-based budgeting, a big budget cut. Yes, there will be howls of protest, but it's the only way you get bureaucracies to change their behavior is to actually cut money so they have to change their behavior. And finally, I think we need fundamental reform in our tax code because that level of complexity and the money flowing in is part of what's feeding all this. So to me, we need constant involvement, and we need to focus we need leadership, and we need to focus our energies on systemic reforms, tax codes, regulatory regimes, budget cuts, zero-based budgeting processes. But what we can't do is check out, give up, and say, well, we're headed over the cliff, that's it. It's too important. I was told that was the last question. Thank you so much. Good luck to all of you. Stay engaged. Whatever your politics are, stay engaged. Because actually, you've heard this over and over and over again for those of you who are younger than I am in this room, but it's true. It is your money we're spending. It's your money we're spending. So pay attention. Thanks so much.